Good afternoon, everyone. The purpose of this briefing is twofold. While the launch team was meeting this afternoon to develop a go-forward plan for Space Shuttle Endeavour, President Obama was here, and he has just left, as we've seen. So we will get a status on the visit of President Obama, as well as a status on Space Shuttle Endeavour. And here to do that for us is our Kennedy Space Center Director, Bob Cabana, the Chairman of the Mission Management Team and the Manager of Launch Integration at Kennedy Space Center for the Space Shuttle program, Mike Moses.
Good afternoon.
And our NASA Space Shuttle Launch Director, Mike Leinbach.
Good afternoon.
And we'll begin first with our Center Director, Bob Cabana. Bob?
Thanks, George. Well, obviously, we would have very much loved to have seen Endeavour lifting off this afternoon, but that wasn't to be the case. And, you know, I'd much rather be on the ground wishing I was flying than in the air wishing I was on the ground. And safety always comes first. These guys will talk about the issue that we had in our plan to troubleshoot it. But in spite of that, even though we scrubbed, the President elected to continue with his visit to the Kennedy Space Center with his family, and I think he really enjoyed it, and I know his family did. He arrived on time, got a great tour of Atlantis over in the Orbiter Processing Facility with Janet Cavandi. Came over to the LCC and met with the crew. The crew is in great spirits, had a long conversation with them. And then he met with the crew families and talked to some folks along the way as he was touring the facilities. So it was he was extremely supportive of what we were doing. He obviously wished he'd have seen a launch too, but he promised his support and told us to look to a good future. So, you know, a lot of times we talk about this transition from space shuttle to the future, and it's really difficult. And he understands it's hard with folks that are losing their jobs, but we're going to focus on doing bigger and better things. And in order to work on a program that's going to take us beyond our home planet again, unfortunately, the shuttle's going to come to an end. I think that we are going to have a good future as we enable commercial space and we build a large vehicle and a rocket that's going to take us beyond our home planet. But, you know, we're going to make that happen. It is going to work. And the reason it's going to work is because of the tremendously talented workforce that we have here at the Kennedy Space Center and within NASA. So I think it was great that he came down today. I think the family really enjoyed the visit. Hopefully we can lure him back for another launch in the future, at least get the family back here. And when it's right, we'll get Endeavour off, and hopefully that's not in the too distant future. In the meantime, the crew is staying in quarantine, and they'll be occupied here for the weekend, and their families are going to stay with them, and they'll have some time together too. But we'll fly when the time is right, and I'll let the two Mikes cover that.
Thanks, Bob. Well, let's see. Let me back up and start with an amazing job by the team to first even get us to the position to be ready to tank. Last night when we left, the weather front coming in was supposed to hit around 7 p.m. It didn't hit till much later, which really threw us a loop for retracting the RSS. I'll let Mike go into the details, but his team did an amazing job of getting that done. I think we rotated the RSS about 5 hours late, but we had an on-time tanking this morning. So the team did an amazing job of working ahead on what they could and having a plan ready to execute as soon as the weather cleared up, and they did just that. A really great example of what the team here at Kennedy can do. Once we got on console, heard the weather briefing, looked like a really good day to tank, so we got started with that. Had a few little things just to keep us talking. There was a leaky hydrogen fill line on the MLP. In the right ohms, one of the regs was running a little higher than it should, so we hooked it up to a different tank to put some ullage in there and bleed down that pressure. And then we had the APU heater problem. Basically, in the APU system, APU stands for Auxiliary Power Unit. It's the system we use to generate hydraulic power. So it burns off hydrogen, spins a turbine, which drives a pump, which pumps hydraulic fluid around the orbiter. We use that hydraulic fluid to throttle and gimbal the main engines, move the aero surfaces, everything you'd use hydraulic power for in an airplane, a large airplane. So we had a problem in one of the heaters on the fuel line, and the fuel is hydrazine. And when you get in orbit, if you can't keep the heater on, that hydrazine can freeze up. And when it freezes, that line can get compacted and loaded up with a lot of hydrazine. And when it thaws, you're worried about a big pressure spike coming into the line as that hydrazine thaws and potentially rupturing the line and causing a leak. Leaking hydrazine is really bad because when you get back in the atmosphere, it immediately catches on fire and would have a big problem. So we don't want a fuel leak in the aft compartment of the orbiter. This particular system, there's 2 heaters on this APU-1. Both of them are required for operations so that we do have the redundancy, because if you did lose your last heater while you're in orbit, you wouldn't necessarily have time to react. The loss of that system on orbit, what we would do is, had this problem occurred once we got on orbit, we would have noticed it, the crew would have evaluated, and the ground control team would have evaluated the thermal response. We might have been able to periodically run the APU to keep it warm. Kind of doubtful in the attitude that we get stuck with in station, because both of station's restrictions and shuttle's restrictions, we can't really maneuver wherever we want to from an attitude and put the sun on the right spot. So we probably would have burned that system off, basically burned it to depletion, got rid of all the hydrazine, and therefore not worried about it. Loss of a single APU by itself on orbit is not an early mission termination. That would have been an okay posture to be in for the mission had we lost an APU. So had we not caught this pre-launch, it would have been an okay day on orbit. It wouldn't have been a bad day. But it's a really good thing we did catch it, because that gives us the opportunity to now fix it and launch with full up redundancy. Mike can talk to you about a little more about what signature we actually saw and what we're going to now have to do to troubleshoot. But it was a pretty straightforward scrub today. The team made a very good call. We talked about it for about the right amount of time, and then we talked a little bit more just to make sure we really did have all the right understanding of the system, and more importantly, to make sure while we were sitting there, you almost get a kind of a free orbit checkout, because you have that really cold hydrogen and oxygen in the aft compartment chilling everything down. So we really got to see how this heater performed and all its associated heaters. We wanted to make sure before we started the drain that there weren't any other troubleshooting steps to take, and we did that. Didn't have anything to do, and so Mike made that scrub call, and it was a really good one at the right time. So now we're in a recovery plan. I'll let Mike talk to you about that plan and what that means to us in terms of the range and the schedules. We look like we got a good shot to keep trying here. There's an Atlas that's scheduled for launch right now on the 6th. So our last possible launch attempt would be on Wednesday the 4th in front of that Atlas launch. They look like they're still in good shape. We'll obviously keep tabs on them as we go forward. But if we had to go on the other side of them, we'd come back probably around the 8th or 9th. Those aren't really good launch days from the station's perspective. That would couple the shuttle's undocking with the 25 Soyuz undocking, and we don't want those 2 events on top of each other. This is a case where we can actually allow the 25 Soyuz to undock while the shuttle's present. We just can't do that on the same day. So we'd have to wait a couple extra days. We'd probably move to the 9th, maybe even the 10th, as our first launch attempt on the other side of Atlas. We're going to have to go do some homework there and talk to the Russians about exactly the right way to deconflict that. But we're not going to do too much on that just yet, because we think we still got a shot in front of Atlas. And with that, I'll stop talking so Mike can give you more of the details.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. Well, let's see. Mike mentioned how well we did overnight. The launch team did overnight, getting recovered from the rotating service structure delay, and that was an outstanding effort. To say it was 4 or 5 hours late probably doesn't sound like much to the folks in the room, but I can tell you that it was an outstanding effort. Probably the latest we've ever rotated the RSS and still got to tanking on time. So tanking was going perfectly fine, and we started talking about the APU issue at about 9 o'clock this morning, give or take a few minutes. And what we saw was that when the fuel line chilled down because of the environment in the aft of the orbiter, the thermostat that controls the heater didn't come on, didn't command the heater to come on. It's much like a thermostat in your home. When it gets cold and you want the heat, the thermostat kicks on the heater. That didn't happen. And there wasn't much troubleshooting we could do while we were still in ET load. We had to get back into the crew module and command the heater on from the crew module itself. So we had to wait until we were done with ET load to get the ground crews into the ship and do that next part of the troubleshooting, which was to command the heater on from the crew module. And that didn't work. And so at that point we knew we had a problem with that heater. We weren't sure if it was the thermostat or the heater, but we knew we only had one of those 2. And we did some talking, as Mike said. We talked for a couple of hours about could we get comfortable launching in a configuration like this. And frankly, this was a pretty straightforward scrub declaration today. You don't like lifting off without redundancy, especially in a critical system like that. So we declared the scrub at 12:16 today. The team immediately got into the drain operation of the external tank. Both commodities are off the tank now. It takes us 24 hours to fully drain the tank. There's a little bit of hydrogen left in the bottom of the tank that has to boil off, and then we inert the tank with helium. That operation takes a full 24 hours from the scrub declaration, and so tomorrow afternoon will be the first time we can start going into after the orbiter, which is where this fuel line is for the auxiliary power unit. We have to go into after the orbiter. We have to get our hands on the fuel line. We have to get our hands on the thermostat and the heater to really see what the problem is. So aft access is absolutely required. That'll happen tomorrow afternoon, and maybe about dinner time tomorrow we'll start our troubleshooting. The troubleshooting involves taking in a can of mist and spraying it on the thermostat to see if we can force a lower temperature on the thermostat and have it kick on, lower than the temperatures we could have gotten in the ship today by ambient. And if that works, then we might have just a thermostat that's out of kilter, and we could replace that thermostat and be in good shape. If it's more than that, then it could be in a box called the LCA, the Load Control Assembly, which is essentially a box full of switches, basically. And if there's something wrong in that box and we have to change out that box, that's a much more extensive job. It would take us quite some time to do that. But we're not there yet. Right now, we think we can get in. We will get in and do the check on the heater itself, on the thermostat and the heater. And if we can go down the easy path, we're still on a track for Monday morning. This initial round of troubleshooting still supports a launch attempt Monday morning. So that's the path we're on now. I have a launch team meeting tomorrow evening to see how the troubleshooting is going, and then another meeting Sunday morning to see what transpired overnight Saturday night with further troubleshooting. So that's where we are today. Unfortunate for Team Endeavour and Mark Kelly and his crew. I talked to Mark when he was in the Astrovan. It was kind of funny the way the timing worked out today. The crew was ready to go out to the pad, and we weren't ready yet to scrub. And so we let them proceed to the pad, but then we held them at the Launch Control Center. There was no reason to commit them inside the launch danger area. And so I talked to them in the Astrovan and told them what was going on, and they understood. And then shortly after that, we scrubbed, and they turned around and came back to their crew quarters in the operations and checkout building. So a disappointing day for Team Endeavour and the astronauts, but as we always say in this business, we will not fly this machine until it's ready, and today it was not ready to go. We hope we can get there by Monday, and we'll have more status for you as the weekend goes on. That's it.
All right, thank you, Mike. And we'll take questions now. Please be sure to give your name and affiliation when we call on you and the mic comes to you. We'll start here in the front with Marcia.
Two quick questions. First, for Mike Leinbach, if it becomes more invasive, are you even going to be able to make the first try out of the other side of the Atlas cutout? And for Mr. Cabana, just wondering if you had a chance to meet with Congresswoman Giffords and any interactions you may have had with her.
Yeah, so the first part, we're set up to try for Monday. We can try all the way through Wednesday, and then we have to stand down for the Atlas. So we have a couple of days extra in there to play with to do a little bit more troubleshooting. So we haven't given up on launching before the Atlas, certainly. That's still a very viable option. If we have to change out that box, the load control assembly, then that's a significant deal. And the retest on that box is quite extensive, a full 2 days retest on that box. And so that would probably drive us to after the Atlas, but we'll just have to see how that plays out.
And I did not get a chance to meet with Gabby, but I understand she's enjoying her time in Florida and her time with Mark, and she's doing well.
Okay, right here.
John Bisney, Sirius XM Satellite Radio. Just for Mike, how quickly did you know this was going to be a showstopper, given your knowledge of orbiter systems? When you heard it was a heater problem on an APU, did you know there was only a limited number of roads you could go down? Did you know pretty well right away you're going to have to call it a day?
I'd say within the first, I don't know, maybe hour and a half or something like that. You never like to give up too early. But also, as you say, we get to know these orbiters pretty well. We get to know the systems. We know what our launch commit criteria are. We were in violation of a launch commit criteria. And while we were talking of a potential way out of the violation, we just weren't going to get there after an hour and a half or 2 hours or so. But we wanted to be fully convinced. Mike wanted to be fully convinced from the program perspective, that we exhausted all possible options, and so that's why it took us a little time to get to the scrub declaration.
Yeah, one of the things, you know, the initial signature looked like just one element of a heater on a line that was failed, and if that's the case, the rest of that line can keep thermal mass. We can actually use the attitude of the orbiter to keep the rest of that line warm. So if that was the actual failure case, we could probably work our way through that problem. Once we let it sit chilled down for a longer period of time, we saw that it was actually, in fact, the entire string of heaters along that line that were gone, and there wasn't much to do at that point.
Okay, right here in front.
Randy Siegel, WSTU Radio. Mike, the APUs on the other two were working properly. There was no glitches, nothing that showed anything. So in any of the testing that's done, you're basically just going to work on that one APU only. That's the bad one, making the assumption that the others are fine as they stand.
That's exactly right. Every other, the other two APUs and all their heaters were working perfectly fine, so it's just that one.
Okay, let's come over here and pick up some right here.
Hi, Mark Kirkman, Interspace News. A couple quick questions, actually. First off, are you tied to Atlantis? Are we in that day-for-day trade-off in terms of hitting Atlantis' schedule? And also, I'm maybe confusing myself on systems knowledge here. I thought your earlier discussions were saying that you had problems with both strings of heaters. Wouldn't that lead to not a single-point failure, or am I confused in what I heard earlier? Thanks.
Let's see, on the Atlantis launch date, they're not yet directly tied one-to-one. I forget how much longer we go, but we knew we could go to the other side of Atlas and probably a week or two before we start running into problems. The longer pull there was MLP and SRB stacking, and that's all behind us. But at some point we do start to bump, and I don't have the final answer there, but I know it's not imminent to have problems with the next one. In fact, we intentionally decoupled the rollout of Atlantis over to the VAB to decouple around Endeavour so that we could get that done regardless of any potential little slips here. We were mostly looking at landing and staying in orbit a couple extra days, but a launch slip would have done the same thing to us. So I think those two were decoupled. On the heater question, it was multiple heaters on string B that were gone. So right, string A was fine. Right. And what you probably saw us do was there was both the ground power that we can feed to that heater string and onboard ship power. It's a switch in the cockpit that would send power through an alternate route source. So we were switching between it's what Mike was talking about, having to wait to get in the cockpit to try the alternate power feed to see if the problem maybe was on the ground side on the B heaters, and it turned out to not be. It was on the ship side.
And the thing that was a little bit maybe confusing if you were listening to it, those four heaters, one of them comes on at a higher temperature than the others, and they kind of come on sequentially is the way you can think of it. And so the one that didn't come on, we know there's something wrong with that string, either that heater or that thermostat. And then the second one comes on at a slightly lower temperature. That was a little flaky. We're not quite sure about that one yet. We think it's failed as well. And the other two don't come on the launch pad because it never gets that cold. And so it's probably a case where the feed to that whole string is off, but we're just not sure yet.
Todd?
Todd Halverson, Florida Today, I think for Mike Leinbach. If you had to remove and replace the LCA, how many days or shifts would that take? And I was also wondering if you might clarify on the unusual turn of the Astrovan into the parking lot at the LCC. It sounds as if that was done so the crew could caucus with you. Is that the way that went, or why exactly did they pull into the LCC parking lot?
No, the Astrovan issue, I can talk to the Astrovan at any point in their travel. And so we just let them start coming out to the pad because we needed just a few more minutes to wrap up our discussions. And, you know, knowing the way this was going to go by that time, we weren't going to let them inside the blast danger area, probably not the launch danger area. And it just got to the point where we said, you know, we're done with our discussion. It just happened. It was just happenstance that they were at the LCC, and that's just the way it turned out.
And
the LCA box change out, the guys are working on that detailed plan. That's going to be a difficult box to change out. And in particular, the retest. There's a good 48 hours or so of retest because there are multiple systems that go through that guy. And so we have to lay out that detailed plan. That would take us a couple extra days for sure, at least.
Randy Avera, Interspace News, for both Leinbach and Moses. Anytime you go into the aft compartment, it's a hazard to make sure you get in and get out, not damage anything. How much access are you going to require? And also, do you have spares for these parts that are in question?
Yeah, right now, access to this LCA and the heater is on the left side of the ship. We only have to go in the left door of the aft. We'll put in the entry-level platform and one platform level below that, excuse me, and we'll be able to do all troubleshooting from that entry location. We don't have to go in the right side of the ship at all. Spares, not an issue. We asked that. We're in good shape.
Clara Moskowitz with Space.com, and I was just hoping you could clarify the history of this kind of issue. Has it happened in the past? When was the last time, and how often has this come up?
Yeah, let's see. The schedule I saw, the recovery schedule, it did fail. We had a similar failure to this, maybe, oh gosh, I don't remember the STS number. But that's where we dug out our history. Whenever we have a failure on the ship, we keep good detailed records of how we've recovered from that failure to give us a starting point for the recovery of the current failure. And so, yeah, we've had this failure before, but I don't remember which ship it was.
Let's see, just on the history of this particular one, we tend to lump heater performance into a category we call it the File 9 checkout. If we were going to ground check out every single heater system, we'd have to do kind of what we're about to go do now, which is go in and actually chill down each individual thermostat to get it to kick on by itself. And that's a very invasive, intensive thing to do every single flow. So what we do is we check their performance on orbit. And if the performance of the heaters, we switch between the A strings and the B strings on orbit, so we give a full ship set of checkout. And as long as there's nothing anomalous in any of the orbit performance, then we consider that checked and ready to go for the next flight. So the last time this string was checked on the ground, I think they tell me was, oh, and I just lost the date from my head. It was at least 2 years ago, I believe. But its last performance in orbit was perfect. So something obviously opened up between then and now, and that's what we're going to go try to find.
Greg Dobbs with HDNet Television. First for Mike Moses, if you end up having had multiple heater failures, you suggested maybe there was a second one, does that point toward or away a thermostat problem or something more important? And Mike Leinbach, two things. Number one, what's the Fisher cut bait time to decide whether you're going to proceed toward a Monday launch? I assume it's sometime Sunday. And you mentioned shortly after the scrub a short circuit.
So let's see, on the multiple failure thing, it kind of depends. A thermostat that's running a little low and just didn't trip, and when we chill it down, we see that it actually does function. That would be a pretty quick change out. But the rest of that circuit, if there's a thermostat that's failed such that it might have an open circuit in it, not necessarily a short circuit, but just an open, that would open up the ground. These things are wired together such that they all the heaters on at least the front half of that string share a common ground. And so that opening up would then pull down in the LCA box that Mike was talking about, would pull open that circuit, which would then give us the signature where we see the whole string failed. So a single failure on one heater thermostat could still cause this problem. That's what we need to go find out. Was it a single thermostat by itself, or was it a failure in there that pulled down the rest of the system?
And as far as the Fisher cut bait time for Monday's launch attempt, recall we're going to have to rotate the RSS to the park position. That would occur Sunday afternoon, probably on the order of 3 o'clock or so. And here again, we could be a little bit late, as we've just proven on that. But you know, Sunday afternoon we have to get into launch preparations because we'd be obviously fueling the ship Monday morning. So sometime noonish Sunday, probably.
Bill?
Bill Harwood, CBS. I guess for Bob Cabana, if I could. What did the president say about, I don't know, I guess giving you some sympathy for having to scrub the launch? I know that was a disappointment to you guys, but can you tell us anything about that conversation? And did he meet with Ms. Giffords, and where did that take place? I assume in the LCC.
As far as the scrub, I didn't talk to him in detail. It was only a greeting and in passing between his stops as we escorted him around. But he was very supportive of, he understands, and we're going to do the right thing. He had a great talk with the crew. He really enjoyed talking with them, and it went on for some time. And yeah, he met with Gabby over in the LCC.
Just come back over here. Any questions on this side? Okay, right here.
J.D. Wallace with KOLD TV out of Tucson. Just curious, would the wind, now looking in hindsight, would the wind have maybe delayed this anyway, since it got pretty gusty right around when it would have launched?
See, they gave me the actual observations. So here at Kennedy, the winds were within limits. It shifted around. It wasn't a crosswind concern as much as it was a tailwind, so we were go for a landing on the 3-3 runway, so that would have been a go RTLS forecast. Over on the TAL sites, we had thought heading into this that we were going to have a good solid TAL site at Istris and there wouldn't be any problems. Turns out it rained all day long at Istris, and so Istris was actually down. Zaragoza was raining as well, but just outside the circle, so Zaragoza would have been a go TAL site. So we actually had observed go weather both RTLS and TAL, which is a little salt in the wound.
All right, any more questions over here? All right, let's come back over here on the front.
Yes, Champ Clark.
Okay, wait for the mic, please.
Champ Clark, People Magazine. Is there any knowledge whether the Congresswoman will now stay for the launch, or will she be returning to Houston? Does anybody have any information on that?
No, they haven't told us what her plans are.
Okay, let's go right here in the back of Ken.
Hi, Ken Kramer, Spaceflight Magazine. For Bob Cabana, do you know if President Obama would come back? And for either of the mics, the Atlas, is there any chance the Air Force might make room for the shuttle if you have to have a few days in the middle of the week?
Well, he did say that if it was Monday, he wouldn't be able to make it back for it on Monday. But as far as a future launch, we'll have to see. No firm commitment there.
And with the Atlas, as always, we'll talk to them and see how they're doing on their processing and how we're doing on ours. And when we get closer to Monday, Tuesday timeframe, if we look like we're go and we need a couple extra days, we can talk to them about that. If it looks like that they're having problems, that might give us a little room. It might be better to let them go because we need a little extra time to go troubleshoot too. So that's a dynamic discussion, and yeah, we'll certainly be having those conversations.
Okay.
Alan Boyle with MSNBC. For Bob Cabana, I wonder if you had any more anecdotes about either the meeting with Congresswoman Giffords or any of the other interactions. For example, you hear some of the statements that Obama may have made, like "Where's the duct tape?" or other bon mots that you might be able to pass along.
Sure. His meeting was private with Gabby, and as far as when he was talking with the crew, I really wasn't listening to everything that they had to say, but they were just talking about the mission and what they were going to do and on it, and he was extremely interested. I understand the girls asked some great questions when they were touring Atlantis of Janet Cavandi, and they were really enthused, and as well as the President and First Lady talking about seeing Atlantis up close, and I know he enjoyed his time with the crew.
You had a question all the way in the back? No, let's not do that because people on NASA TV can't hear you.
Donna Leinwand with USA Today. Can you tell me how the astronauts will be spending the next couple of days and how much access they'll have to their families and what you'll be doing with them to keep them up to speed?
Well, I guess I haven't been there before. They will have time with their families. Obviously, not their children, but those that are old enough to have, allow them to be in quarantine and visit them. There'll be time out at the beach house to relax and get together with their families again. They'll obviously be going over their procedures on a regular basis, making sure they're ready, and they'll be listening in to hear, how we're doing on the troubleshooting, and looking forward to what the weather is going to be and what the plan is for going to fly. But mainly, they're just going to be relaxing in crew quarters. They're well prepared. They've worked long and hard for this, and they're ready to go. So this is an opportunity to just kick back a little bit and relax.
James?
Thanks. James Dean with Florida Today. First for Mike Leinbach, just to further clarify, it sounds like the crew knew as they were even suiting up or before they even walked out that a scrub was, or this issue was in work and a scrub was either possible or probable?
Well, like us, they know the ship very well, if not better. I assume Colonel Cabana knows it extremely well. So yeah, they probably understood that this was a significant problem that we might not make our way out of. But in order to stay on the timeline, had we gotten lucky, we had to keep them headed towards the pad and the ingress. And indeed, if we needed another hour or two to talk the problem, we would have done that, and they would have strapped in. And had we scrubbed after they strapped in, then they would have understood that too. So it was just a very coincidental thing with the timing of the crew.
Okay, right here.
Smith, KGUN-TV in Tucson. Does meeting with the president effectively stretch the crew quarantine rules?
No, actually the president had a physical by the flight crew's crew surgeon and was cleared to meet with the crew. And the crew's in a big room. You know, I mean, nobody was up close to him other than the president and first lady, and they were both cleared by the doctor.
Is that similar to the procedure used to make sure family members are okay to be in close quarters?
Absolutely. Whenever we have a crew in quarantine, anybody that is with the crew in quarantine has to have been cleared by a flight doc, and you know, it was nothing unusual or out of the ordinary.
Here.
Scott Powers from the Orlando Sentinel for Mike Leinbach. A couple of questions. First, the two lines that were involved here, do they each have 4 heaters on them, is my understanding? And the second question is, the switch box, when you get that off, is the problem that takes a couple of extra days mainly because of so much testing that needs to be done, or is it actually being able to get to it and get it out of that spot?
I'm not 100% certain of the configuration of the heaters and the different strings. Maybe Bob or Mike has that.
I'm counting them right now.
Okay. And the other one, we have to get into the avionics bay and change out that box, and so a lot of work to open that box, the avionics bay up and change it out, close it back out, and then the retest. So it's a significant deal.
And there's looks like there's 12 different heaters on that line, but not all of them will cycle at the temperatures we see at the pad. So the 4 we were talking about we knew weren't responding. There's the rest of them are in the category of they may or may not be responding at the pad. So we're gonna have to the teams are doing that exactly right now, pulling all that detailed data, comparing it to the history to say should that heater have been cycling, to know exactly which pieces are failed. That helps us with kind of trying to find our common root cause.
Those 2 lines are identical?
The 2 heater strings are identical. So yeah, if you think about it, there's basically a pipe that carries the hydrogen, a fluid line, and it has a wrapped line around it. That wrap is a resistance heater. So you run electricity through the wire, it heats up, that provides heat. And so there's the A string is wrapped along the pipe, and then right beside it the B string is wrapped along. So there's basically 2 separate heaters that run along the same piece of fluid line. And so the one string was working, the other one was not.
Okay, we'll take 1 or 2 more and then we'll wrap up. Right here.
Interspace News for Bob Cabana. In your opening statement, you said that the President Obama said that he would promise you his support. Could you give us more about the context of that statement, and is this something new from what you've heard in the past from the President?
No, I think the President supports our spaceflight program, and he's very supportive of what we're doing. The commercial space, we've got here at Kennedy Space Center, we got the commercial crew program here at KSC supporting that. He is supportive of us building a large rocket and crew vehicle to go beyond our home planet. So he just emphasized that he supports what we're doing, and he's proud of what we're doing.
Grant Miller, the Odessan. I guess this is for one of the mics. Can you tell us how the weather looks for Monday through Wednesday launch next week? I know that's a ways off, but and for here or the abort sites.
I'm not trying to be flippant, but I don't know, and I'm not sure it matters much, right? Because the forecasts are what they are. The long range forecast when we talked this morning, we talked at a 48-hour scrub, so that would have been a Sunday attempt, and we kind of looked at the same weather pattern we're facing right now. Really decent chance here at Kennedy for good launch weather. Winds were dropping off, basically low clouds. The TAO weather was about the same, which was iffy, But I know that's going to improve because the high pressure will be settling in finally over Spain and France. And so we should have decent TOW weather at the beginning of next week, but we haven't even started to look at the long-range forecast yet. I tend to delete all the email with a forecast greater than 48 hours in it.
All right, we'll take one more back here, and that'll be it.
James Spahn with Nico Nico. A question for Bob Cabana. Did the President have any words of encouragement to you, to the staff here at KIC with the shuttle program winding down? What were his comments to you?
No specific comments. He was just, you know, everybody that he ran into, he thanked them for, you know, what we were doing. And I wasn't privy to all the President's conversations, a few short greetings. And he was just, you know, it was very positive. He was really, enjoyed his tour. He enjoyed seeing all that he saw and, you know, wants us to keep doing good things.
And George, before you wrap up, I forgot to mention, we had talked a lot about ET-122, our external tank. And all the modifications it went through, and I failed to, in my opening remarks, tell you that we went ahead, the ICE team went out, looked at that tank because we had it fully loaded. The inspection teams are out there now, or will be going out there now that it's drained. But the reports from that team were perfect. The tank looked beautiful. Their words were that it looked like every other tank. Performance was flawless from that external tank. So I did want to make sure we mentioned that we ended up getting a good tanking test, so we know this tank is in really great shape.
And I'd also like to just add my thanks to both Mikes. I think the team just did an outstanding job getting us to where we needed to be today. Had we had the opportunity to launch, they overcame an awful lot. It's an outstanding team. The flow team that got Endeavour ready to go fly, it was super. I can't say enough good things about them. So these guys did an awesome job, and we'll get it right, and we'll go fly as soon as we can.
All right, before we wrap up, we have a 1-minute video of President Obama's visit here this afternoon, and after that, that will conclude our briefing. Thank you.
I'm going to hold the tile, and you're going to just squeeze that bottle and watch what happens. You don't have to get close, but just squeeze hard. There you go. See all that water? Soaks it up. The tile is very flat. The coating is about the thickness of an eggshell, and it did have some like when they were brand new. That tile is never formed. Those are being placement. There's a landing there. Look how tough that is. How much of that is orbiting? How much of that is you guys going to the space station? Yeah, we'll see the Great Wall. I hear that for Rome.
I was up there for a year, and I looked, well, you can see the pyramids of Egypt.
Thank you so much. We'll see you out there. This is
All right, cool.
Thank you. Hope you can make it.